Sometimes when you're in a face-to-face environment, you can have a session, you bring everyone in, it's easier. When it's online, you really need to think, okay, how this moment that I have everyone, it's really special now. So how do I make the most of that and make the learning in that space really count?
Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of All About HR. My name is Nelly, and in today's episode I'm being joined by Deborah Gallo. She's a Learning and Development Director at SentinelOne. Now, before she joined SentinelOne, Deb worked for companies such as Netflix and also is one of our fabulous instructors here at the Academy to Innovate HR. We talked about how can you engage employees in their learning and development whilst they're mostly remote. We also touched upon building a learning culture and how to scale it in various different countries. And Deb shared an epic fail that was also a little bit funny with us. So all in all, we had an awesome conversation. Now, I think without a further ado, let's get to that conversation. Before we do so, as always, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and like this video. Thank you so much and enjoy. Welcome to another episode of All About HR. Deb, welcome along to this episode of All About HR. I am so happy that you are joining us today. How are you, first of all?
I'm great, Nelly. Super excited to be chatting to you. And it's a sunny day. It's beautiful heading into the weekend, so I'm good.
Likewise, I'm very much looking forward to our conversation. Now, before we're going to dive into the, let's say, a little bit more serious stuff, Deb, I know that you recently joined a new company, SentinelOne. So you went through the onboarding. We were chatting a little bit before we were doing this conversation about how that was. And of course, in your previous job, you developed and rolled out onboarding programs. So you were at the other end, actually, of the whole onboarding process. So how has it been for you to be on the receiving end of the onboarding process?
Great question. I was just thinking about that. It's like a roller coaster. It's all sorts of emotions and incredibly humbling, because I came in thinking, I know all about onboarding. I've done it. I've organized it. I've delivered it. It's, a piece of cake. And then as I sort of sat in that onboarding roller coaster, I'm like, oh, this is really difficult. It's been very eye-opening to be on the other side and to actually experience sort of virtual onboarding during the pandemic. We're still sort of in lockdown, and having to meet and sort of build relationships sort of online. It's a lot more difficult than what I was expecting. But roller coasters go up and down. So I'm on the up and feeling good about it now. So yeah, it's good.
Nice. So happy to hear that. I hope it will keep going upwards and upwards from now on.
I hope so. At some point it needs to do a bit of a dip, but I'm ready for it.
Cool. So, Deb, we're not going to make this a conversation about COVID at all, but at the same time, it is a little bit hard not to touch on the past year or so. Yeah. So if we look at L&D, how do you think that the past year or so has changed it? Has it changed it in any way?
I think it definitely has changed, at least from my experience in the organizations that I was working in, that I'm working in. There's obviously it's a different context and different needs. So what was once a very, you had your programs that were running, you knew what you were doing, the face-to-face interactions, and they were sort of virtual and blended, that was all working. But from one day to another, where everyone is in a leveled situation and we're all virtual, and really having to rethink how we connect with our learners, with our staff, how we engage them. It's not the same doing it virtually than when you do it sort of in a face-to-face environment. It has taken a lot of rethinking, also learning some new skills, facilitating online. Not everyone had an opportunity to do that sort of repeatedly, I think, over the last 12 months, and really trying to be also creative and innovative in how we use the tools that we have at our disposal that we may not have been using to its full extent before. So definitely a shift. And I think what I'm curious about is as we come out of this phase, how do we build on what we've just learned and what we've tried and everything that we've been doing? How do we then take it to the next step? I don't think we're going to go back to how things were. I think it's going to be a hybrid environment, which is a new learning, because I think after this is people working from home, some in the office. So we now have a hybrid. Okay, how do we keep engaging and upskilling and sort of connecting when we're in that kind of environment? So I think we've learned a lot. I think there's still a lot for us to keep learning.
Yes. Wow, that was, I think, a great answer. And I think there are so many elements that I feel like I want to unpack in that. And I think we will touch on some of these things a little bit later in our conversation. I'm gonna, let's say, perhaps take a step back and let's talk a little bit about cultivating a learning culture, because that's one of the things that you've been working on as well when you were at Netflix. Now, I imagine that cultivating a learning culture is a big undertaking under any circumstances, let alone when at some point the world finds itself in a pandemic and people have to work remotely. Now, we can touch on some of the biggest differences between cultivating a learning culture in a, let's say, pre-COVID era, and then, when all of a sudden you have to continue your efforts, but then remotely. Can you tell us something about that?
I think but building a learning culture is essential to sort of to everyone in the L&D sort of space. When we think about learning, there's obviously the social component of it is huge. I mean, we're social beings. We learn with others, through others, just being around people, being coached, being mentored. So I think when we go from a learning culture where you have access to that and it happens, ad hoc, either intentional or just sort of these moments just happen, to an environment where you really have to be a lot more intentional and you don't have those connections that just happen. You really need to build them, design them, sort of really think about it. It really takes the strategizing and the thinking about the learning culture to the next level, because you just have to be so much more intentional. So I think that's the biggest difference, is that being intentional about the connections that you're building, the relationships, the learning experiences. People at home or wherever they are working feel connected to each other, to the organization, and that they're learning. So I would say it's a little bit harder, and it takes a lot more intentionality.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm just thinking, so we are sometimes now back in the office here in Rotterdam, and then there really is a difference when more people of the team are in the same space, and you hear people talking indeed, and you hear them talking to each other. These are all learning moments. And so, when you're remote and everybody is in their own place, you miss out on these learning moments. Have you found a bit of a solution on how to maybe create these ones? But then
I don't know if I'd say a solution. I think I like to think in terms of experiments and what we're trying, and sort of saying, okay, let's see how this works. So looking at the tools that we have and these spaces where people connect, and we were using them before. So really looking at, okay, how do we make more moments of connection? Can we do that through these tools? How do we integrate these into the learning experience? Do we need new sort of tools or new ways of connecting people? And the other thing is the moments that you have with people, how do we make those moments like really count and really special, and focus on the things that we really need to sort of dive into? Sometimes when you're in a face-to-face environment, you can have a session, you bring everyone in, it's easier. When it's online, you really need to think, okay, how this moment that I have everyone, it's really special now. So how do I make the most of that and make the learning in that space really count? It's just thinking about what we've been doing is looking at sort of our tools. Okay, what can we use? How can we connect people? How many more touch points do we need to build in? And how does that fit in with all the other stuff that's going on, all the other Zoom sessions and meetings and stuff that people have? Like, does it make sense to just keep adding on top of that, or do we need to think about this differently? So
I like that though, and I like how that is completely in the spirit of being in this mindset of always learning, right? That is exactly what experimenting is about, because you do an experiment, you learn something from what went well, what didn't go so well, and how can we improve that? So I like that a lot. I wanted to go to the hiring process and talk about that for a moment, because if in an organization you're cultivating a learning culture, or you perhaps already have established a learning culture, I can imagine that it's important that when you hire people that you keep that in mind. Now, How can you make sure during the hiring process that people will fit within that learning culture?
Yeah, no, I love that question. And the way I think about it, Nelly, you sort of say, how do people fit? I love to think about it like how does this person enhance? How is this person going to help build the learning culture? Because that learning culture is continuously evolving, and we don't want it to stay static or to fit people into it. So the way I see it is that hiring process is a bit of a dance. It's like, okay, let's see if, how well we dance together, and can you make this sort of this choreography or this dance like even better? But there's two things. There's the new person or the candidate coming in, and kind of what I'm attuned to is that the level of curiosity and the level of is this person open to learning just within our conversation. And I think the key thing is making it a conversation where we're learning about each other, and not a conversation where I'm testing you to see if you pass the test so that you fit into our culture. So that's the first sort of, I guess, step in terms of welcoming in, opening up and saying, hey, this is our culture. I'm attuned to how curious you are. And also I need to be able to show and entice and be open to this is how we are and how we're building the learning culture. So that the candidate can also say, yeah, I see myself dancing in that and helping making it even better.
I very much like that analogy of dancing and the choreography and seeing how you can actually together with the candidate maybe make that choreography even richer. Now, is there then any difference between if you're hiring more junior people or if you're actually hiring more senior people? Because managers, for instance, they often play such an important role in really championing this learning culture. So is there a difference, and is that something that you try to figure out during this dance that is then the hiring process? And if you're not really sure if there is that certain level, for instance, of curiosity or the potential for that, is it then still something that maybe can be ingrained afterwards? So once someone has actually joined?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think there's the curiosity piece, I think, applies across the board. So whether we're hiring sort of at a junior level or at a senior level, being curious and open, and also humble to acknowledging sort of what you don't know. I think as you get sort of higher and higher, I particularly look out for that sort of that humble, that self-awareness, that curiosity, because that's what you want your leaders to role model. So if you see that, if we can pick that up, if you can identify that from the beginning, then I think there's better chances that they will be able to maybe dial that in and really role model that once they're in the organization. I think can people sort of learn that once they're in the organization? Of course. I mean, I'm in L&D and I believe that everyone has the potential to learn. So I think, yes, of course. What it comes down to is, how much do we invest? How much are we investing in building, in supporting, in growing our people? And is that, if we're the type of organization that does have that mindset that, yes, this is part of how, of our ethos is we do develop and grow people, then maybe it's not such a determining factor if they don't display it and they have the technical skills or they have something else that the role requires. So a bit of a long-winded answer, but so it gives you a bit of an idea.
It does. And what I like about it is I keep hearing the same important elements coming back. Now I'm talking to you, but I also hear it from other people, the importance of curiosity, but also indeed self-awareness and also humility. So it's very nice to hear that once again, to be honest. So that something else that I also was curious about is when as a company go to a period of rapid growth. And I mean, I think in that case, Netflix is a super good example, of course, because the company has done so well over the past years. But that can also, of course, then come with extra challenges for that learning culture within the company. Yeah. So how do you go about that? So you see the company expanding, let's say, left, front, and center into different geographical areas as well. What are some of the things perhaps to look out for in that case?
I mean, I've been in a number of organizations that have been through sort of different stages of growth and different pace of growth. And I think that the culture piece, and there's that little bit of fear of, oh, as we grow so quickly, is our culture going to dilute? Like, is it going to change? And I think the way that I think about it is that the culture will evolve, it will change. It may not change fundamentally, but there'll be aspects that, yes, evolve. And what happens is that when you're small, or when you're smaller and the pace isn't as crazy, you have a sense that you can see everything and you understand, and you can kind of like put your arms around the culture and you say, you know what, I know it. And then once that pace, that growth starts, you kind of lose that, and you think, oh my gosh, I can no longer see it all, and I can't put my arms around it, and I get a sense that I'm losing control of it, and it's going to be this crazy beast that turns into something that we can't control. And I think that's where a bit of that fear comes. Oh my gosh, our culture is going to dilute. Whereas I think it'll evolve and it changes. And our role in L&D and talent, even leaders, is to ensure that we're kind of guiding that culture to evolve in the way that we want it to. And that guiding and that evolving means that we have to be more intentional about the touch points when we talk about culture, how we talk about it, how we break it down and make it practical, right? Because I think that's one of the key things, is that you can talk about culture, but then it becomes this thing that everyone talks about. But it's like, what does that actually mean in reality, in practicality? So some of the things that I've done in my previous roles is really breaking it down, and something that we did in my role at Netflix was, where virtual, people can't get a sense for what is the culture. We can read it, we hear about it, we talk about it. So it's really creating those moments of storytelling, of where we can start breaking it down and just telling stories of how, okay, this part of the culture, we talk about this. Well, what does that mean for me? How have I been experiencing that? Hear stories from others. Have some debates, have some cases where we put ourselves in and we can experiment with the culture. So it's creating those moments, which a lot of the focus of the learning initiatives was around culture, because it's really, how do we bring people into the fold of really understanding their role in it and what it looks like in practice. And you don't get that just by talking about it. You need to make that practical. So it's during onboarding, it's having specific sessions, it's having culture sort of conversations, it's really creating moments to interact, break it down, and then it'll evolve, and that's fine. And it may look different as you're going in different places, and that's also okay. There'll be a red thread or a backbone which will stay the same, and then it'll evolve.
That is maybe a misunderstanding people sometimes have when it comes to culture, right? That indeed they're having this fear of the culture diluting, but but culture, I think, is something that should always be evolving. As the company grows, that should enrich in the culture as well. I also love what you said about these different touch points, and indeed onboarding can be a really important one in that sense. And I also see how you need to be more intentional about it when everyone's remote, because I can do the work for regardless what company, right? But it is about the culture. And that's also one of the reasons why I'm so happy to work for a certain company. So I think this is what makes the difference.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Nice. I wanted to change tack a little, Deb. And now you already touched on it briefly. I wanted to go to engagement, because obviously within L&D, engagement is an important topic, and there's a lot that can be said about it. So engaging learners, that is often a bit of a challenge, of course. Maybe you can share some of your biggest learnings in that regard when it comes to engaging people.
I think in general, when I think of engaging it's really that old age sort of classic, well, what's in it for me? I think that's always things like, if I'm participating, if I'm putting in time as a learner, like, what am I going to get out of this? And is it clear? And is that aligned to what I'm getting? And if it is, then there'll be a level of engagement. I think on top of that, then in this type of environment, there are competing distractions. So I'm at home, I can, just switch off or disconnect, and the social pressure of doing that I think is a little bit less, especially if we've got sort of big sessions. So it does require, again, going back to that, how are we designing the session? So that element of purpose, of connection. So purpose in terms of, do I know what I'm going to get out of this, and is that valuable for me right now? Connection, am I connecting with others? Is there that social element? And then there's that, I guess, the fun piece, the innovative piece, is that also needs to be there. So it's like a concoction of different sort of elements that come into it. But I think those are the key: the purpose, the connection to others, and then that little bit of fun, and just making it sort of enjoyable. I mean, learning most of the time, I'd love to think it's enjoyable. I mean, there's a lot of times where it's not, because sometimes it is, it takes effort and practice, and that sometimes can be on the sort of less enjoyable side. So it's thinking about, okay, how do we sort of add in all these different elements to really make that an experience that I take something away from, that I've connected with others, that I've felt like there's that social element, and that I've had fun.
Yeah, interesting as well. And you mentioned that social element already before, I believe, but I'm sure you know this better than I do, that there is this kind of 70-20-10 rule, right? Where I believe 70% is, I think, learning by doing, or learning on the job, if we talk about the world of work. And then there's 20% is that social part and coaching, I think. And then 10%, only 10% really is corporate learning, if I'm correct. But so zooming in then on that social learning part, because obviously, again, when we are remote, that is a little bit harder than when we are in the same space.
Yes.
Have you any ideas or any experiments perhaps that you've been doing to create that connection and to create that social element, even when we are separated?
Yeah, I mean, what we've been experimenting with, or trying to do, is look at, first of all, when you have a moment where there's people sort of together, how do we incorporate a little bit of a connecting with others first before we dive into whatever it is that we're focusing on? And in the beginning of the pandemic, so whether you have a meeting or a session, whether it's icebreakers or different ways of just creating that moment of connection, it was like new and fun. But then as the pandemic sort of went on, and we've been 12 months, that it can get a little bit like, oh, here we go again. But I do think that's really important, sort of that creating the connections, which in this environment may need to be a little bit more, I guess, architectured or sort of intentional. Did that answer your question?
It did answer my question. Absolutely. Great. Thank you. Now, going forward, when we look actually at the learning content, what are your thoughts on that? How do you think that could evolve? Because, or maybe another question would be like, what would be the future of blended? How would that look like?
I mean, I think there's a huge future, because I think we've demonstrated that it works. I think blended learning has existed from, 20, 30 years ago. It's been around for a long time. Virtual learning has been around for a long, long time. What wasn't probably as evident was the buy-in, or everyone sort of having that as the only option. And that's what we've had for the last 12 months. So for me, I think the diversity of choice is just mind-blowing now. I mean, I'm doing courses with groups from sort of all over the world, which back 12 months ago I would have had to travel, and it just takes a lot more effort. So I think now my expectations have also changed, because when I look at courses, I'm like, well, I can do anything because now it's all online. So do they have something available? And when I see like, oh, they don't, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, so my expectations have already changed. I'm expecting the availability, the choice to be there, which means that for the providers and for content, they do need to start thinking about, okay, how do we sort of expand sort of our offerings? And also it means if there's more of this, then, and I'm expecting it, then the quality that I expect is also going to be sort of increased. So it's not going to be enough just to have sitting in a session with 500 other people and just listening for an hour like that. Yeah, my expectations have also increased. So it's really thinking about design, that blended experience, sort of design again, the moments that you have with people. How do you design that? The content that's asynchronous that you have outside of these moments, how do we make that sort of engaging and enriching, and also that you connect people, because you can also do that sort of in an asynchronous manner, but really starting to recognize that there's a bit of I guess, a pressure to step it up in terms of how we're designing and what we're offering. And people will expect high quality content, will expect connections with others, will expect engagement, will expect it to be fun. So it's exciting, because that means there's just so much sort of innovation that's going to come out, and opportunities. I love that.
Have you already come across something that kind of blew your mind?
I mean, I've gone through a whole heap of sessions that I didn't think was possible online. I've done sort of team coaching where it really is about getting together with people and doing that online, and it worked fine. I've signed up to a creative workshop exploring my inner critic, and it's all with sort of acting and sort of, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm curious to see how this works in this environment. So I'm actively testing out, just getting a bit of a sense for, okay, let's give this a try. Because I mean, and I've come out of all of these really amazed that, hey, I learned a lot. I met people from all over the place, and it was fun, and I'm learning like so much. So
nice.
It's an exciting time to be, I think, in the learning space.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you're totally right about that. Yeah. Deb, before we are going to wrap up, so I think we're in this unique position at the moment when we look at the workforce, because there is so many different generations that work together. And now when it comes to L&D, have you noticed differences when it comes to people from different generations, and maybe their preferences in terms of what they want to develop, or maybe even the way they would like the content to be provided? Have you noticed any kind of differences?
To be honest, no. I mean, I've heard a lot about sort of millennials and all the different generations. It's not something that I've really dived into and said, okay, let's have a look. I think I look at more so when I'm designing, or I look at who I have in the room and who I'm designing for as a learner sort of cohort. I think some of their expectations go across the board in terms of expectations around technology, whether it's someone who's 20 or whether it's, my mum who uses Instagram and all the social apps. I'm like, we're all sort of at some point, changing our behaviors. So I think the expectations and the differences, there may be a little, but I don't, I wouldn't necessarily say, okay, this is for this group and this is for that group. I think it goes across the board.
Nice and interesting as well to hear that. And in a way, I think it makes sense, because everybody, indeed, whether it's someone who's 20 years old or whether it's my mom and dad, we are all now in our personal lives, we're used, for instance, to a certain level of user experience, right? When we use an app or when we use the computer. And I can see how that translates into what we expect as well when we're in the workplace and when we're learning at work. So Deb, one thing we really like to do in our series All About HR is we really like to ask people about if they can share an epic win or an epic fail, because these are things that often are their biggest learning moments, and we are all about sharing these learning moments with the audience. So I was wondering, can you perhaps share an epic win or an epic fail with us?
Yeah, I'd love to. I have an epic fail that I'm happy to share. This was years and years ago. I was working for an organization. It was one of my first corporate sort of training roles, and I was doing a lot of facilitating. So my role was maybe like 4 to 5 times a week facilitating sort of course after course. I was going from SQL programming to giving feedback to leading your team to all sorts of things. And on this particular day, I had a time management course that I was delivering. So back when sort of that was the thing. So I had a group of people. We had a whole day of time management. Started the course. We got to midday. I sort of broke for lunch, gave everyone sort of an hour to go off for lunch. I closed the training room sort of door and I went to lunch. When I came back 5 minutes before everyone was due, I got to the door and it was locked, and there was a sign on the door saying that this room is now in a yoga class. And I looked at my calendar and my schedule and I saw that the yoga class was booked in, and I was like, oh my God, I'm delivering a time management course and I really am not good at managing time, because I really missed that there's other people using the rooms, and my whole class came back and we were all standing outside the door going, yeah, this is a great lesson in time management. So checking your calendars and making sure you have an idea of what's coming. I was like, yes, good point. So from that day on, I know everything that's happening, and I'm onto my calendar like it's, I am on top of it. So that was a huge, a bit of embarrassing, but a learning moment. We all had a good laugh about that.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Cool. Yeah.
So a very last thing, Deb, is I think a bit of a fun question.
Sure.
Is what are you most excited about for 2021?
Not work related. My wife is having a baby. So
oh, congratulations.
Thank you. So that's exciting.
That is super exciting.
I've got a big learning phase coming up for me.
Absolutely.
Not my first child, but still, I think every child is different. But I think professionally in this space, I've just started a new role. I'm really architecting and thinking about how I'm setting up sort of L&D in an organization that's growing very quickly. So that for me is exciting in terms of getting into that. Broader, it's, like I said, for the opportunities for sort of for learning and just seeing how my peers in the industry really sort of push us to the next level in terms of how we design, how we facilitate, how we deliver. The options are just endless. So it's exciting to see new technology coming out. It's just, like I said, it's just a great time to be in this space.
Fantastic. I think that was a beautiful answer to
cool.
end our conversation with. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dev.
Awesome. It's been super fun, Nelly. Thank you.